Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most monumental, devastating, and honestly, world-altering events in human history, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. Whether you're a major history buff or just someone trying to make sense of the complex geopolitical world we live in today, understanding the anatomy of this event is absolutely essential. We're going to look closely at the science, the timeline, the profound human cost, and the historical debate that still echoes today.
But before we zoom out to the big picture, I want to start with a tiny, almost unbelievable detail. How did a simple cloudy sky literally change history? You see, on August 9, 1945, the primary target for the second atomic bomb was not actually Nagasaki, it was the city of Kokura. But when the American bomber arrived, poor visibility and heavy cloud cover completely obscured the target. After multiple passes, the crew had to pivot to their secondary target. That simple shift in the weather saved Kokura from devastation and ultimately doomed Nagasaki. It's a chilling reminder of how the smallest butterfly effect can alter the fate of hundreds of thousands of lives.
Section 1. The Target and the Cloud. The Dawn of the Atomic Age.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really wrap our heads around these weapons, we have to understand the massive, unprecedented apparatus that built them, the Manhattan Project. We're talking $2 billion. That was the staggering cost of this project. And remember, that's in 1940s money. Driven by early, terrifying fears that Nazi Germany would develop a nuclear weapon first, the United States poured astronomical resources into this top-secret initiative. At its absolute peak, this project employed over 125,000 people simultaneously across dozens of sites, culminating at the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico under the direction of J. Robert Oppenheimer.
So all of that time, that huge amount of money and that massive manpower, it actually resulted in two fundamentally different types of atomic weapons. The first was called Little Boy. This was a gun-type fission weapon that relied on enriched uranium-235. The second, Fat Man, was a much more complex implosion-type nuclear weapon that used plutonium-239. It wasn't just one single bomb design they cracked. It was two completely distinct scientific achievements, deployed just days apart, representing a terrifying leap in military technology.
Section 2. Science of the Blast. Evaluating the source terms. Let's see how all this incredible research translated into the actual mechanics of the blast. What really happens when a weapon like this detonates? Well, according to the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, this was not your ordinary explosion. You know, ordinary burning or explosions are just chemical reactions, a basic rearrangement of atoms. But in an atomic reaction, the very identity of the atom is changed. Matter itself is fundamentally transformed into unprecedented energy. To give you a sense of scale here, just a tiny fraction of the mass in the bomb's active core yielded an explosion equivalent to thousands of tons of conventional explosives.
The source evaluation breaks this terrifying release of energy down into four specific, devastating forms. First, you have light and radiant heat, speeding out at an incredible 186,000 miles per second. Next comes penetrating gamma radiation, traveling at that exact same speed. And finally, the pressure or shockwaves trailing closely behind at about 2 miles per second initially.
But the most crucial thing to grasp here is the temperature. The center of the explosion, which was several hundred feet above the ground, formed a fireball whose core reached millions of degrees centigrade. Millions! It's almost impossible for the human mind to truly comprehend that level of heat. Even at its outer edges, it was several thousand degrees. The radiant heat was so intense it instantly charred combustible objects. It literally left sharply defined shadows on the ground and on walls where objects or people momentarily shielded the surfaces behind them from the blinding flash. To fully understand why the physical destruction on the ground was so absolute, the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey provides a really crucial context by comparing American and Japanese cities. Think about it like this. A densely packed American city like Manhattan had a daytime population density of about 145,000 people per square mile. The center of Hiroshima, by comparison, had 46,000 per square mile. But the key difference was the architecture. Unlike American cities, where a huge percentage of buildings were made of brick or stucco, Japanese cities were heavily constructed of wood. So against a blast of this sheer magnitude and the massive firestorms that immediately followed, the overwhelming bulk of these structures simply didn't stand a chance. This architectural reality fundamentally dictated the scale of the destruction.
Section 3. The Surrender of Japan. The Timeline of August 1945.
The catastrophic destruction of these cities happened within a rapidly collapsing window of time. Let's walk through this compressed timeline to see just how incredibly fast geopolitical realities shifted. On August 6, the little boy bomb is dropped on Hiroshima. Just 3 days later, on August 9, two massive events hit at once. The Fat Man bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, and simultaneously, the Soviet Union declares war on Japan and invades Manchuria. Facing the total obliteration of their cities and a massive new front opening up with the Soviets, Emperor Hirohito makes the unprecedented dual-voice broadcast on August 15th, announcing Japan's formal surrender to the Allies.
Section 4. The Human Toll, the Hibakusha.
We have to remember that behind the geopolitical timelines and the cold science of the blast is a staggering human tragedy. We must look at the profound suffering of the victims. The survivors of these bombings are known in Japan as the Hibakusha. In the decades following the war, these survivors formed organizations, most notably Nihon Hidankyo back in 1956, to share their stories, advocate for their medical rights, and stand as living witnesses against the use of nuclear weapons. Their personal testimonies humanize an event that can otherwise seem totally abstract just because of its overwhelming scale.
And the scale of the human cost here is truly devastating. By the end of 1945, between 150,000 and 246,000 people were killed by the two bombs. Hiroshima saw between 90,000 and 166,000 deaths, while Nagasaki suffered 60,000 to 80,000. Roughly half of these deaths happened on the very first day. For months afterward, victims continued to succumb to burns, radiation sickness, and compounded malnutrition. And perhaps the most sobering fact of all, and why understanding this cost is so vital for us today, despite Hiroshima hosting a sizable military garrison of 24,000 troops, an estimated 90% of the dead across both cities were civilians.
Section 5. The Historical Debate, Competing Lenses.
Because of this incredible loss of civilian life, the bombings remain one of the most fiercely debated decisions in all of human history. To understand this event fully, we have to look neutrally at the competing historical lenses through which it's viewed. On one side of the debate, defenders of the decision, including then-Secretary of War Henry Stimson, argued that the bombings were an absolute necessity to break Japan's refusal to surrender. They estimated that a conventional Allied land invasion of the Japanese mainland would have cost 1 million American casualties and exponentially more Japanese lives. Conversely, critics argue that the bombs simply weren't necessary to secure a surrender. They point to the Soviet entry into the war as the true catalyst for Japan's collapse, and argue that unleashing such indiscriminate destruction on civilian populations actually constituted a war crime. We look at both perspectives to really grasp the deep, unresolved moral complexities of the atomic age.
Which really leaves us with this final, lingering question. Proponents argue that the sheer terror of Hiroshima and Nagasaki created the long peace of the Cold War, essentially proving that nuclear weapons are just too horrific to ever be used again. But critics warn that the very existence and precedent of these weapons have placed humanity on a permanent edge, where we are always just one miscalculation away from a global nuclear holocaust. As you continue to research and learn about this pivotal moment in history, which legacy do you believe we're living in today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I encourage you to keep exploring the history that shapes our world.